Hello everybody, this is Sarah Scott on behalf of the Centre for Hellenic Studies in Washington DC. Sarah Scott here with Leonard Muellner. Thanks for joining us, Lenny.
It's my pleasure.
We've been looking at some of the discussions and comments on our forums, and we're going to just talk a little bit about a couple of issues that arise from some of the points that people have been thinking about and talking about. And so one of them is really thinking about the role of women versus the role of men as it's depicted in the epic, and how that's talked about by the various different characters in the epic.
And I mean, I think, you know, gender roles are something that's easy to oversimplify and to be reductive of. And the other problem with them is that it's very easy for us to you know, reject our own ideas about these things or what we know of other people's ideas about these things into the text. So it's hard. I think it's good to be careful. And one thing to watch out for is that the discussion starts out with this quotation from Hector's speech to Diomedes, who's running away, and the English translation says, "You're no better than a woman." Okay, whereas the Greek text says that you become a woman, okay, by running away. So it invokes the notion that women are not meant to be warriors in the text, and this is you know, it doesn't necessarily say they're inferior beings. It says that they're afraid of confrontation in war and will run away from it. That's consistent with the way the text portrays women. There are exceptional women warriors like the Amazon, and someone in the text refers to the story of Penthesilea and Achilles, who have an erotic relationship in other mythological traditions. But I think, and it's a very interesting thing that you can, with mythology, you can think about things like that. But the women in Troy are not women warriors, okay? On the other hand, it's not a simple picture, and the discussion, I think, does very well to cite the relationship between Hector and Andromache, and how Andromache tries to get Hector to assume a defensive posture, and he wants to be aggressive and risk his life. And another aspect of this is that just as Hector's name means the protector, okay, and he should be doing that, right? And one of the things you say about Hector in the epic, it seems to have that awareness of what his name means. It means that whenever you say Hector, you say in Greek, oioskare ruata ilion Hector. Hector was the one who all alone protected Troy, okay? So that expression Hector protector, which works in English, is something that reflects something that's actually in the epic diction and tradition. But Andromache's name also means something. It means the battle of men, and you know, she does give him advice, and in response to the advice, Hector says to her, I don't think the whole text is quoted in the discussion, but it's worth mentioning. In response to her, Hector says, war is men's business, okay? You take care of the weaving, okay, which is a fundamental activity of women. And so I think those are not these. It's about differentiation of gender roles, and not necessarily one male's being superior to women. Okay, I think the text doesn't engage in that kind of discussion. And after all, as somebody I think has pointed out, the whole of the Iliad is about getting a woman back. Okay, and the whole problem between Achilles and Agamemnon is also about women. Women are you know, the most. This is another important point about the way women work in the Iliad, is that feminist interpretations, I think, have become more sensitive. But when I used to teach these texts, the women were offended because at the beginning of the Iliad, it seems like Briseis is a piece of property, and she gets handed back and forth without having any say about what happens to her. I think that's correct, that she has no say, but to assume that she's a piece of property doesn't work, because the world of the Iliad doesn't distinguish between people and things. Okay, everything, things behave like people and people behave like things, and women are the most expensive, if you wish, the most valuable kinds of property, and that's why there's so much. There has so much importance to who has them, who owns them, and getting them back in the Iliad. So you can't reduce these things to our gender definitions, and I think it's a good thing to not oversimplify the gender roles. It's easy to do, and I think I can do it too, just as well as other people. But it's not a.
But that's why it's important to look at the passages carefully and see what they're actually saying and
yes.
what's going on, which we have to dig down a little bit beneath the surface to do that.
Right.
Sort of touching on some of these themes, the sort of relationships between men and women, and we see quite a tender relationship supposedly between Hector and Andromache,
Right.
and then also there's the relationship between men characters or women characters and
Yes.
those around them. Some of them seem to be friends, some of them seem to be an entourage or companions. There's various words that are used to describe these kinds of relationships.
Right.
It might be worth just touching on that, because I think it might help, with these sorts of discussions.
Yes, and I think there's the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus is a relationship of, it's qualified, and I think the discussion on the forum reflects this. It's a discussion. It's a relationship qualified as philia, as their philoi, and you also say that Patroclus is Achilles' philos heteros, his beloved companion. Okay, these are, and I think in Greek culture, their relationship is a idealization, is conceived of for a very long period of time and understood as a kind of ideal relationship between men. So it actually gets reinterpreted. I think the discussion makes it clear that there's no erotic component to their relationship expressed in the poetry. Okay, the Iliad won't talk about homosexuality, whereas it will talk about heterosexual sex. Okay, and people going to bed together, but it does not talk about homosexuality for whatever reasons. And there may be interesting reasons for that, because in some social contexts in Greeks, it's fine to talk about it, but not in the epic. So why not? But I don't want to go off into that discussion at the moment. But I think the word that you use, beloved, works for males and females, and the word philia works for heterosexual as well as I'm not speaking in anything but literal terms, and homosexual relationships. In other words, relationships by members of the same sex or relationship by members of opposite sexes. So you have the same term. This word, the root philos, has an extension that I think is different for us. And another thing that's important is to realize that there isn't, when we think of friends and friendship, we think of people who are not relatives. Okay, so we distinguish between friends and members of your family, whereas this word philoi, or the people who are your philoi, includes your family members. Okay, those who are near and dear to you, as well as the parts of your body. Okay, can be near and can be philos to you, because they're attached to you and you're attached to them, in the same way as we say we're attached to our best friends and stuff like that. So this notion of a kind of the closeness and the intimacy that friends have bridges gender gaps and bridges the gaps that our society has between blood relations and friends. Okay, So for example, in the story that's very important in the Iliad, the story of Meleagros and his wife Cleopatra, she's the most important. Turns out that the most important friend for him is Cleopatra, right? And she's the person who, when her life is menaced, turns him around. Okay, so this is I don't think we're used to thinking of our. We speak of the love that we have for our wives or husbands, but we don't think of them as friends. Okay, so we can't make that kind of distinction in this text. Okay, that doesn't work, and it's kind of hard to think ourselves into that. But I think it's worth trying to come to terms with it. The other term that's important in understanding the poem is this notion, the word therapon, which there's a big discussion of, I think, in the ancient Greek hero book, and that Greg, I'm sure, talks about as well, which is a word with a very interesting history, and which designates a relationship that seems to be more than friendship to us. Okay, a relationship of identity. But I think that these words are continuous in their concept with one another. So the word therapon comes from a word in Hittite that means a ritual substitute for the king, someone who can take on the role and the identity of another person. And it's clear that that's going on in the story of Achilles and Patroclus, because Patroclus, you will see what happens if you haven't gotten there, okay? And Patroclus is Achilles' therapon. We'll come to this. This word is, in our vocabulary, survives in words like therapy and therapeutics, and works with somebody who takes care of another person in a medical context, okay? And you maybe know there's a beautiful vase painting of from the 5th century BCE. It's the other way around from the notion of him being the therapon, and we don't have any moment like that recorded in our poem, okay? But this idea of caring and of identity exchange is something that's actually built also into the notion of philo, of the word philos, because there's a proverb in Aristotle that goes like, in Aristotle's Ethics, it goes like this: what is a philos? What is a friend? And the answer is another I, allos ego. When you translate another I into Latin, you get alter ego. Okay, that's where the expression came into English by way of Nietzsche and others. Okay, so he's an alter ego. I think this is an expression that we all know, and it reflects this notion of the contiguity of the attachment and of the replaceability that friends have for each other, and that therapon in its history also reflects. Is that helpful, Sarah? Are there other questions that come to mind?
No, I think that is very helpful, thinking about it in that much more almost continuous and a much wider range of meanings maybe than any one translation can give any of these.
Right.
So that means that some of these words are tracked in our source book and in our focus passages. So when people see those words, they can think in terms of that whole range of meanings, not just a friend or a companion. And I think sometimes Greg has translated it as near and dear.
Yes, I think that's
quite nice.
That works well, and I think that that covers a lot more cases than friend, okay, or friendship or friendly, and,
or even beloved or.
Yes, and I think there's one of the most brilliant historical linguists of Greek, a man named Émile Benveniste, wrote an article about this or a chapter about this in his last book. He went through every example of the word philos in Homer, and he decided that in every case it means near and dear. Okay, I think that's a nice way of doing it. It never is a casual word, okay? It always has meaning, and so there's a lot of affect in it, I think, and it shouldn't be glossed over, okay? Or you shouldn't consider it to be. There's a lot of emotion, and this notion of friendship as attachment, okay, that's the most powerful kind of friendship for us, okay? I think that in our culture, we think that when you're a child, you're attached to your mother, right? And you gradually grow up and you get separated from her, right? And there's a process that our culture encourages of separation and independence, and I think it's a biological process as well as a physical. So that as the child gets weaned from its mother, and this notion of being detached physically, okay, is an important kind of relationship. And I think in our culture, it's thought of as a sort of primitive kind of friendship. And when you get older, you have less dependent kind of interdependent sorts of relationships, okay? That's not in the Iliad. Okay, that may be something that we grow up with, but there's no sense of dependence relationships as being a bad thing that are immature, okay? And it's not inherent in the way the world works either, okay? So you can see how the attachment among philoi is a very powerful thing in this cultural tradition that's worth appreciating. As it not I don't mean not praising it, but just understanding it as being something different from what we're used to.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Lenny. I think that gives us a lot to think about, and
okay,
certainly given me a better understanding and gives it more resonance with the poetry, I think. So
great. Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks, Lenny.